Imagine skipping breakfast, feeling more energized, and losing weight effortlessly. Sound too good to be true? Well, that is what some proponents claim the famous intermittent fasting can do for you.
The most profoundly transformational concept and strategy
called intermittent fasting.
Intermittent fasting.
Everybody's doing it.
Good for weight loss. I lost 125 pounds.
Lost 80 pounds, 3 inches in my waist.
Changed my life.
But having done intermittent fasting for over 4 years now, I am here to give you my honest thoughts and to share my experiences with it, and whether or not I think it is something that everyone should be doing. So for the uninitiated, intermittent fasting is a form of time-restricted eating where the focus is not on what you eat, but when you eat it. And there's various different types of fasting methods that you can follow, but probably the most popular method is the 16-8 method, which is where you have a 16-hour window where you don't eat anything or consume any calories, and then you have an 8-hour eating window. And that's the type of fasting I do. And so for me, I have it so that my eating window is between 12 p.m. and 8 p.m. So that's what intermittent fasting is, but why on earth would anyone want to not eat for 2/3 of the day, or in some cases even longer? I mean, what are the proposed benefits? Well, weight loss is probably one of the first things you'll hear about, and studies do seem to suggest that people who follow a fasting regime do lose weight, especially when they're people who are starting off overweight. Other studies also do suggest some pretty amazing health benefits, ranging from reducing the likelihood of certain diseases to improved brain health. And what about the famous buzzword that so many fasting gurus seem to love? Autophagy.
Autophagy.
Autophagy?
Autophagy. Go educate yourself on autophagy.
Which is a process of removing waste material from cells. And again, there does seem to be evidence to suggest that fasting does result in autophagy. Having said all that, some of the evidence does seem a bit conflicting, and there does seem to be mixed opinions about whether those benefits are resulting directly from intermittent fasting. And so with that all in mind, I thought that the only way I'm really gonna know what intermittent fasting is all about is if I give it a go. And so I jumped right in to the 16-8 method of fasting, and to be honest with you, I've never looked back. Okay, let's now talk about my personal experience and all the positives and the reasons why I do really like intermittent fasting. And firstly, the biggest reason for me, which has been somewhat life-changing, is that generally I do just feel way better doing intermittent fasting. And so what exactly does that mean? Well, before I did intermittent fasting, I used to get very shaky and I would just feel rubbish very quickly after I used to eat. And I was a proper hangry monster, and it just felt like I was having to constantly eat just to feel semi-normal, and I was just generally not feeling that good. Now, my hunch was always that this was because of some sort of blood sugar sensitivity issue. But with intermittent fasting, I do feel way more stable and have much more consistent energy levels. I also don't get shaky after I eat, and I do feel way more satisfied when I do eat. I will say that I don't think this is all because of intermittent fasting. I mean, I have learned a lot more about what to eat and have cleaned up my diet and the types of foods that I think sit best with me. But at the same time, I do think that if you're not eating as often and spiking your glucose levels quite so much, it does make sense that you would feel more stable throughout the day. Okay, so another thing I like is the convenience factor, because for me, I do like pretty active mornings where I do a quick meditation and then do some exercise first thing. And so to essentially be able to just get up and get after it without having to worry about breakfast is something that I do enjoy. Another thing is that I find it is easier to get lean doing intermittent fasting. Now, I have been able to get under 10% body fat doing non-intermittent fasting diets, but whenever I've done so, it's always been pretty miserable and very difficult to do. But with intermittent fasting, I find that I'm able to still have a big lunch, and then usually I'll just cut out some carbs from dinner and then from an afternoon snack. And so I have found it to be way easier and far less miserable to lean out with intermittent fasting. A fourth benefit of intermittent fasting is that I'm obviously never eating beyond 8 p.m. And I do definitely think that has really helped with my sleep. And I firmly do believe now that it's going to be harder to get to sleep if you've eaten closer to bedtime and your body is still having to work to digest your food. And then a final benefit of intermittent fasting that I was not necessarily expecting was that I find it way easier to hit my calorie and my macronutrient targets with intermittent fasting. And I think the reason for this is because every day I, or my very lovely fiance, will meal prep me my first meal of the day when I break my fast, and this will always be a high calorie, high protein meal. And just by having that meal as my first meal of the day, I then find I can be very flexible with the rest of my day and still hit my targets. If you're enjoying this video or just dying from starvation because you've been doing intermittent fasting, please do subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate it. And so clearly, having stayed with intermittent fasting for over 4 years now, I am a big fan. But are there any downsides to it? And to be honest, I can only think of two. So one is that I do find lifting in the morning to be harder and I guess less enjoyable, as I do feel slightly weaker and less energized when I am fasting. And so that means I usually am only able to lift like 170 kg on the bench press instead of 180 kg. I would also just say that I only feel that way with lifting. For running in the morning, I actually feel great fasted and have no issues with it at all. The other downside is something that I've only found more recently, which is that I've been taking electrolytes a lot more seriously recently and would like to hydrate with electrolytes first thing ideally. But the electrolyte powder that I do take does have a small amount of calories in, and so technically I think I would be breaking my fast if I was to have the electrolyte powder. And so I do hold off having electrolytes until lunchtime and just stick with water and coffee. So overall, do I think everyone should be doing intermittent fasting? Well, to be honest with you, maybe not. It seems it's a little bit like Marmite. Some people seem to love it and some people not so much. And truthfully, it even seems like some of the real experts on intermittent fasting can't agree on its benefits. And it also seems to be emerging that some of the benefits around weight loss and insulin resistance and those sorts of things are more just from having a good calorie restricted diet. One thing I would say though is that from my experience, people generally do seem to find it a little bit easier to restrict their calories through intermittent fasting as opposed to other diets. And so if we are at least in agreement that a good calorie restricted diet is a good thing, and intermittent fasting is perhaps the easiest way to consistently restrict your calories, perhaps intermittent fasting actually is something that people should think about giving a go. For me personally, I clearly love it. It has made me feel way better, it's convenient, and it suits my lifestyle really well. And to be honest, at the moment, I can't ever see me not following some sort of intermittent fasting diet. However, like most things in life, the only way you're gonna know whether it suits you is to give it a go. And that would be my recommendation. Give it a go and see whether it's something that does suit you. And so to finish with, I will just give you my top tips on how to get the best out of your intermittent fasting. So firstly, in the beginning, you likely will feel hungry. Like, why am I doing this hungry? But hang on in there, your body will soon adjust. Secondly, stay hydrated as water controls hunger and will keep your energy levels up. Thirdly, black coffee is an absolute lifesaver and completely fine even in your fasting window. Fourthly, keep your protein intake high in your feeding window as we are trying to lose fat, not muscle mass. And finally, trying to have a consistent feeding and fasting window is important, but life happens. So don't worry too much if sometimes you need to tweak your schedule a little bit. So there you have it. My thoughts and experiences having done intermittent fasting for over 4 years now. I hope you found something useful in there, and if you did, please do check out my previous upload here, and it really would be great, and I have absolutely no idea why you would not subscribe to the channel. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.